Welcome to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, where every week I take a look inside the world of film and television with those who have lived it and experienced it. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and joining me on today's show is writer, director, actor. He really does a little bit of everything when it comes to film, Mr. Kyle Couch. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Derek. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely, and we were just talking before we started because you're located up in Michigan, and I'm down here in Florida, and the summers cannot be more different in my opinion. I mean, I know it's warm up there where you guys are at, but we're like in the heart of summertime here in Florida, and it's I can't get to my mailbox without sweating. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. I mean, it's a little sweaty up here, I'm not going to lie, but yeah, going to get the mail and sweating while you're doing it, that doesn't sound too fun.
Yeah, I feel like I burn at least 20 calories and 2 pounds of sweat whenever I just walk outside. So it might be a decent workout program, who knows. But so as I said, you're located up in Michigan. Are you a lifelong native of Michigan?
I am. Originally, I'm actually located in close to Detroit, but I did grow up a little bit downriver initially. So I grew up just surrounded by the woods and cornfield and dirt roads and all that stuff. So now I'm a little bit more city located, but initially, yeah, I kind of lived out in the boonies, if you will.
And I think depending on your circumstances, I think growing up in a small town can be, a good thing. I grew up in one myself, and it's something that I wouldn't trade. And kind of like you, I kind of live more city-based now, but, I appreciate small town roots.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I think it inspired my imagination from the get-go. So, yeah, it's definitely there is definitely a small part of me that misses that and kind of hopes one day to maybe relocate my family to a similar situation, but unfortunately it's not in the cards at the moment. So yeah,
you never know how things are going to work out. But mentioning growing up in a small town kind of sparked your imagination. Was the desire to be a filmmaker, was that something that was instilled in you at an early age?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I think storytelling to a degree was, I know it's kind of cliche to say that, but, it's funny. People ask me sometimes, did you always did you always know you wanted to make films? And, I didn't necessarily know that was the medium that I wanted to kind of tackle. I knew that I was kind of arty and I like to express myself creatively and, make little books and stuff like that growing up. But, filmmaking just seemed like it was almost like wanting to become an astronaut. It felt like something that was so far from reach that, there's really no point in even kind of entertaining that thought. And, I just remember though, when I was a kid and it's kind of funny. I would play with these little Jurassic Park toys. And when I was growing up, that was kind of the big movie. And so I'd go out in my backyard and I'd play with them. But right before I did, I'd write little credits on lined notebook paper. And I would drop the credits in front of my face, almost like the credits at the beginning of a movie. And then I'd play I would set up all the action figures and whatnot all over the place in the yard. And then I would go from scene to scene to scene and play for almost exactly 2 hours. And it's just funny looking back at that. Of course, at the time, you're like, I just like the movie Jurassic Park, and I want to make it as much like that as possible. But kind of looking back, I always think maybe it was in me. I just didn't really know it at the time. And so when I got a little bit older and got in high school and started kind of playing around with video editing, and that's when it kind of took off, the digital video editing, software and whatnot. I really kind of got into it, and really the rest is history.
Yeah, Jurassic Park's not a bad film to idolize growing up. I've never heard of someone writing out the credits and incorporating that. That's awesome. That's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I wonder. I see some of these movies now, and there's those weird kid playing by himself, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think that was me. So my mom's like, no, you were a good little boy, and you did good, and then she gets a little deeper, and she's like, well, I guess you were kind of quiet. And I'm like, well, there's either become a filmmaker or a serial killer, so I guess becoming a filmmaker is a good thing.
Yeah, one I think is a little bit better of an option than the other. But you bring up a good point. You mentioning you knew you wanted to do it when you were a kid, but it's one of those things, because I can remember watching movies like Jurassic Park and of course Star Wars and other movies growing up, and I'm like, how does someone do that? And you just kind of don't give it a second thought. You're like, it's impossible to do. But now
Yeah.
that we're in the 2020s, and even dating back to 10, 15 years ago, the accessibility to make films is much more broad than it used to be, because even when I was in college, I was like, I still don't really have any idea how I could do it. And then after graduating, I was introduced really to independent films as far as on a bigger scale, and it seems much more attainable now than ever before. So I know with COVID and everything, that's kind of put a halt on really any type of production, but still the accessibility to do it now is fantastic.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's just everybody's got to walk around with a camera in their pocket. Again, that's another cliche thing that you hear a lot of people say is, well, you got a camera on your phone, and you've got it in your pocket. You can download an editing app and just do it. Everybody could do it. And so now it's just a battle, or not even a battle, but kind of a challenge to see who can do it best. And I really do think that's the future is who can do it best and who can do it for cheap. And I mean, a lot of my friends who make films, they do everything. They do audio, they do cinematography, they do acting, they do writing. I mean, it's really changing. Paul, I think it's Paul Thomas Anderson on his last movie. I don't know if he let him go or if he just decided to do the cinematography on his own. But I mean, it's even going into the big leagues where you have these big name directors just kind of taking on more hats and more stuff. So it's fascinating to see how things have changed from just one director doing just that directing, and then all these other people doing things, to now it seems like directors are also writers and actors and all that stuff. So I think it's really cool to see.
Well, I've especially noticed it with short film, and that was something that I did want to bring up, and I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead here, but looking at your IMDb page, I noticed that you wore a lot of different hats for a lot of different projects, whether it's directing, writing, editing, acting, cinematography. Were these things that like you just wanted to learn everything, or was some of it out of necessity?
I think it was probably a little bit of both, for sure. For me, filmmaking was always kind of a one-man band type scenario. When I first kind of got serious about making short films, I didn't really know anyone to lean on. I didn't go to film school. I have an associate's degree in cinematic arts from a community college, and I learned a lot of really great things about storytelling and that, but as far as on-set stuff, I didn't. So I had to teach myself. And then, it was really just somebody seeing something I had made and being like, hey, do you know how to do sound? Yeah, I can record sound. Oh, hey, do you know how to do cinematography? Yeah, I did it before. And again, starting off with some of my short films in the beginning, I did everything. So, yeah, it was kind of out of necessity in the beginning, but, as I've progressed and even now, like lately, I've really been getting into cinematography and just kind of lighting in general, and how much of a difference lighting can do for your movie than having poor lighting. And so, there's just a lot of things that I just love researching about and learning about.
Well, and that's something that I tell people as well. If you want to work on a set, start out as a PA, but try and learn multiple things, because that makes you useful in several different ways if you learn how to edit or you learn how to work a camera or you even take acting lessons. And that's something that I've noticed too, is that someone will start out, and I use actors primarily as this example, but they'll start out as an actor, but they eventually become fascinated with all other aspects of the filmmaking process. Like I use Ron Howard for an example. He started as an actor, and now he's one of the greatest directors in Hollywood right now. So I think learning as much as you can is an invaluable thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot agree more. I mean, I think too, when you go to work with an editor after directing a film, when you go to, even during production work with the sound guy, for one, you appreciate it more. You appreciate that position and what goes into it. And it's a lot easier to shrug off the difficulties that they may be experiencing because you know yourself. But also, I think they can kind of sense if you know what you're talking about. And that, having the respect, especially if you're hiring kind of somewhat strangers to work on your film and you really have no relationship with them outside of making a movie or the movie you're about to do, I think when you have a little bit of knowledge, it shows a little bit of respect to them, and it allows them to kind of be like, okay, he's not the pro here, but he does know enough to kind of help me out and look out for me, and I think that's so important, that unity that you can build amongst your crew.
Well, and that's the best way to learn also, is to be on set. Like you, I never went to film school. I have a degree in video broadcasting from a community college that we have here in town, but most of my experiences, I've learned it through, my day job, which I'm fortunate enough to have a job that does involve some type of production. But the few films that I've worked on, those have been where I've learned the most things. Is, I learn by doing and watching other people do what they do. So, that's another thing I tell people is, even if you are only on as a PA, it means you get to watch everybody do what they do, and sometimes that's the best way to learn.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm a doer too. I can't. I'm very hard to teach in that sense of like, hey, you do X, Y, Z, okay, and then you do this, you got it, okay, cool, and then this. I'm like, okay, X, Y, Z, all right, let me do X, Y, Z, and then you tell me if I'm doing it right. Okay, cool, now let's move on. So I have to do it. That's the only way I can learn.
It's like that brings up actually a fun memory, is that, when I first learned how to edit, someone explained to me how to do it, but without actually showing it, and I had no clue what they were talking about. But as soon as they showed me how to do it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's easy. At least, for me, it was easy, because that's, personally one of my favorite things about the filmmaking process is editing, because it's, you get to see all the footage and you're kind of like putting the puzzle together, whether it's syncing the audio, adding in the score. If you do color correction, that's part of it too. It's the editing part is fascinating to me. But out of all the things that you've done, you've listed directing, writing, editing, acting. Is there a part of the process that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, I'd have to say, I would say it would be probably editing. I kind of agree with you completely. The only difference I would say with editing is editing can be the most rewarding, the most fun experience you can have on a film, but it can also be the most horrifying moment for a film. And actually, I heard Martin Scorsese say, and I think it was in one of his master classes, or it's like a preview for his master class or something like that. But he said, if you get done with your first edit of the movie and you're absolutely scared, then that means you're doing a good job or something like that, or something's wrong if you're not horrified after the first initial edit. And it's interesting because with editing, it is a moment where you get to see everything come together. And with the tent, this is the first time that I had an outside editor edit something of mine. And I remember that initial experience. It's like, okay, a different person is putting together your vision. So just be patient. And, it was a little scary at first because I was like, oh man, this is a little different than I thought it was going to be. And then, as we started massaging it and working together, I was like, oh, okay, here we go. And then that real magic, I think that's when the movie magic starts, that kind of cliche thing that people say is movie magic. It starts in editing. So yeah, I would say editing is definitely favored the most by me. And I would say that's probably followed closely by writing. Writing is really fun too.
Well, with writing, you get to create the puzzle, and then with editing, you
Yeah.
get to put it back together. So
Yeah.
I would
Perfect.
agree with you. The writing is something that I personally am still working on, but it is a fun process to create the environment and the characters, and everything that you see on screen. If you're the writer, you're like, I wrote that dialogue or I wrote that situation. So it's really cool to see, from different aspects and whatever job you have, as far as the filmmaking process goes. When you watch the final product, you're like, you know what, that was all worth it. The long hours were all worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're absolutely right with the writing. It's you build the puzzle, and then editing, you're putting the puzzle together. It's almost like you're building the pieces, and then that last process. And it is. I've heard said as well. That editing is kind of the final writing stage, because that's when you decide what works and what doesn't work, and what hits the floor and what stays. And so, that is kind of editing in a lot of ways is very similar to writing. It's almost, I would say, it's the most similar thing in filmmaking to writing is editing. So, yeah.
Now, I could not agree more. So you mentioned the tent. So, this primary reason why you're here is to talk about, this was actually your first feature film that you did. So
Yep.
how was the difference preparing for this as opposed to, a short that you had done? Obviously everything's on a bigger scale when it comes to a feature, but what were some of the big differences in the preparation process for the tent?
I think the biggest difference was just the amount of writing. With a short film and the writing process, and I had worked with somebody for quite some time in writing, and they primarily did all the writing, and I just kind of would come in at the end and like read through it and make some edits or what have you. But this was I did this kind of writing process on my own until the end. I had a little bit of help towards the end, and I'll talk about that later. But yeah, I think with this, just the writing is so much more. With a short film, it's kind of like, if you make a 15-minute to even 30-minute film, you're looking at, they say, well, page translates to a minute roughly. And so 30 pages tops. This is, you're writing 100, 120 pages, and you're going through it over and over to the point almost where you're kind of sick of it. And, you're just trying to mine it and make it better and add in things or take away things. And so, the preparation, I think, is really in the writing. That's the main difference. And then I would say, the other parts of it is, insurance. With short films that I had shot in the past, I didn't really think about insurance. I didn't really think about, getting a whole lot of permission to shoot in certain locations, because we'd be there for maybe 30 minutes. So you could get away with a lot more. With this, you have a much bigger crew. You're hiring tons of different people, because I think one of the biggest revelations that I had was script supervisor. And, the huge thing about that, I had never used one prior. And, when you're shooting something that's, ends up being an 80-minute film versus a 15-minute film, you have to be so careful on those consistencies, because you will come back to shoot the same scene the next day. And so, hiring a script supervisor, kind of keeping everything in line, keeping, the stuff on set at the same place. They take pictures. It depends who you hire, but it's just I think that was a whole nother thing that I didn't even think about until somebody had mentioned, have you thought about a script supervisor, and here's what you should. So, I think it really, between the writing and kind of bringing on a script supervisor to make sure that everything gets done, it's I think that was the biggest thing. It was just the amount of preparation is so much more than a short film was, at least for me in the past.
Well, I think anytime that you can bring on someone to alleviate other stresses and other jobs, because, as a director, your job should be focusing on the performances. And I'm sure, with other things that you had to do, bringing on a script supervisor and having one less thing to worry about because they're taking care of other issues that otherwise you would have taken care of, had to have definitely helped when it came to that.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think you raise a good point. A director needs to focus on one, maybe two things tops, the performances, and then maybe the visual style, where you put your camera on and how you tell your story visually. And, the more hats you have to wear, the more it takes away from that. And I think up until this point, I didn't have that freedom before. I shot a documentary probably a couple years ago, 17, I think. And I literally was running around with a camera, hooked to a boom mic with a microphone, hooked to a stabilizer, and, just racking focus. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And I'm like, I don't know how I did this. And, it was, I couldn't even think about, like, am I getting everything? I just got everything. And I really burned myself out. And I'm a huge champion for, work-life balance. And I think that when you choose to take on everything yourself, it's going to burn you out quickly. And that creative energy that you had in the beginning that inspired you to make the movie, it goes away really quickly when you end up wearing too many hats. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Absolutely. So what was the inspiration behind the story for this movie?
The inspiration came from a couple different places. The first place that it came from was a nightmare, really, as simple as that. I had heard of people keeping, like, dream journals and nightmare journals or stuff like that. And I'm more apt to have nightmares than I am dreams, simply because I genuinely just enjoy kind of the horror, sci-fi, thriller genre. And so it's funny, I have these nightmares that maybe some people would consider nightmares, but I kind of, they don't scare me too much anymore. But I had this very vivid kind of nightmare. And I was like in a tent, and I was jumping from tent to tent. I had to get out of the tent and run because these creatures were coming after me. And I just remember, like, waking up the next day and telling my wife about the dream, and she was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." She hadn't heard it, or she had heard stuff like that before from me, and didn't think twice about it. But it just didn't escape my mind. I just remember thinking, like, man, I can't let go of this. And then it really, I was like, man, I'd love to write a story that revolves around something similar to that. And then I just started writing, and then I kind of started thinking of scenarios as I got kind of lost a little bit in my writing, and I started thinking, okay, like, well, where is this going? What is the story here? So I stopped everything, and I just kind of, like, for me, I try to find the emotional thing that's going to attach me to it. Like, what is going to keep me interested in this, telling this story? And it has to be emotional for me. And so, really, I think for most of us, we don't have to dig too far to know what, things have emotionally scarred us in our lives. And so I found something that was very prevalent and big for me. And so I kind of attached that emotional beat to the story. And then that's when it just took on a life of its own. And in a lot of ways, like, people may say this, but genuinely it just started writing itself. And it was just, I felt like I was on cloud nine the whole time, because I was just like, oh my gosh, I can pull from this and this and this. And I'm purposefully not mentioning what that thing was from my past, just because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. But yeah, I found an emotional beat that I attached to, and it really helped me kind of progress through the script at a much more creative pace.
That's got to be a great feeling. And you mentioned the term, the script almost writes itself, because in the writing process, you can hit writer's block and you get so frustrated because you don't know where to take the story. So the fact hearing, that it was almost kind of writing itself is great to hear. And it's funny because as I was watching it, it felt like I was watching like a nightmare that I would have. So it's interesting that you say you pulled the story from that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The biggest thing for me was just putting people in the seat of David, who's the main character in the film. And so, the editing was influenced by that. The cinematography was influenced by that. Everything was essentially influenced by him and what's going on with him, in the film. And so, yeah, I mean, I think very much, without saying anything, he is experiencing a nightmare in a certain kind of way. So, it's definitely, I take that as a compliment.
The interesting thing about the film to me is that, and one of the reasons why I wanted to watch it is because horror and thriller type of movies aren't really my thing. I can distinctly remember as a kid, my aunt made me watch Leprechaun, and it freaked me out. So it kind of turned me off of anything horror related. And it's, going back and watching that now, it's more like a comedy than a horror. But
yeah,
it scared me away from that genre for a while, and then through doing this podcast and dabbling into filmmaking myself has given me more of an appreciation for it. So that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to watch this film. But what I liked about it is that at its core, it actually has a very intimate story, and I don't want to give away like the details of what that intimate story is, but it goes in directions that you do not expect. And typically that does happen with horror films. There's always some type of twist that you don't see coming. But this one I really did not see coming. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I thought the two characters, David and Mary, I thought they played off each other very well. I love this. The majority of the movie is revolved around them and their dynamic, and you watch it develop throughout the film. And that's, to me, the core of what makes filmmaking great is the dynamic between characters. And that's what I enjoyed the most about this movie.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it means a lot. There's a lot of hard work that went into, the whole film as a total. So hearing that in general is always, it's certainly flattering and it's appreciated, because it is blood, sweat, and tears that goes into this. And, I know those actors, Tim and Lulu, who played David and Mary, they worked really hard on really developing kind of who they were in relation as people, first off, to those characters, and then, what would their dynamic be like. So I know that they will be very happy to hear you say that. And, I think with those two characters in the film, it was a matter of kind of, taking two people that were the opposites, that always breeds good conflict, but, putting them in a scenario where, they have to figure it out. And, again, without going into too much, and I'm kind of realizing, as I've done a couple interviews, that I kind of made a film where it's really tough to discuss it without giving too much away, but but I can say with those two characters, they definitely, you know, they don't see eye to eye, and that was, I think that was some of the most fun in writing dialogue, was just trying to figure out, you know, who they were to each other more than anything. So yeah, I definitely appreciate those words.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, that always makes the most interesting dynamic between characters is when they don't get along, but in a way they have to in order to get through whatever it is that they're going through, you know, whatever the situation might be. But no, I personally really enjoyed the movie, and I was happy to watch it. Like I said, I love the dynamic between the characters. I thought they told a great story. You know, I love the little attention to detail, and there's one that I want to bring up, but I won't because it kind of gives away what happens. But I'll just say there are things that are cut into the movie with little details that I really liked. So little attention to detail, things like that, you know, that, you know, some people might not catch. I really love. Like, I love the little nuances of what's put into a movie, and I caught quite a few of those with this. So that made it for a fun viewing.
Yeah, and there was definitely, you know, the cool thing, and we were kind of talking about writing before, is, you know, I wrote this, and then, you know, a whole nother layer that was added to it in production was just set design and props. And, you know, then of course a whole nother layer that's added to it is in editing. How do you edit things? How are you cross-cutting? What are you doing? How are you telling the story the best with the editing? And then, you know, not to sound redundant, but a whole nother layer is sound design, you know, and what more stuff can we add in there with sound design? So, you know, all those different layers kind of coming together. And you know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Pierre's score in the film, you know, the little stories that he was telling with that score. And, you know, all those things kind of blending together to kind of add that idea of detail. And, you know, I will have to say I purposefully included, and, you know, movies do this all the time, including symbolism, but I probably symbolism overloaded the movie just because I love that so much in other movies. And I think I was reading an article about Get Out, Jordan Peele's movie that came out a few years ago. And it was like the top 20 things you missed in this movie. And then it's like, you know, just layer after layer after layer of symbolism that, you know, you're just so entranced by the story that you miss these little tiny details that he put into the film. And, you know, I was really inspired by that. And I thought to myself, you know, I really want to do that with the tent. I really want to put little tiny details that maybe people will miss. You know, maybe there are things that people won't draw a connection to. But it's there, and I know it's there. And so, yeah, there's, you know, we had a whole spoiler conversation about this. I would love to, you know, tell you all about, you know, some of the things that I put in there that I know for sure people are going to miss. But for me as a filmmaker, I just loved putting it in there because, you know, I kind of know what it means.
Yeah.
You know, and that's enough for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, symbolism's fantastic. Throughout the process of you making this movie, what was the biggest lesson that you learned? Being as this was your first feature, what was the biggest lesson that you took away from making this movie?
You know, it's a great question. I think there was a few lessons. I think the biggest lesson was take your time. You know, really take your time. There were scenes in this movie that I really wish I could have spent a lot more time with, kind of developing from a you know, production standpoint. You know, and that's really just budget. You know, every time I kind of think about the next film or the film after that, and I think like, okay, man, I'd love to have a bigger budget. And people are like, well, what would you spend it on? I thought the movie looked pretty good. And it's like, well, budget's not necessarily just about, and perhaps this is the bigger lesson I learned. Budget is not necessarily just about, getting the best cinematographer or the best actors or the best, those things obviously you want to have those things, but it's also about time. We shot in about 14 days, and, bigger budget means you have more time. And so let's say we had, twice the amount of budget, whatever that is, then we had twice the amount of time that we can shoot these scenes for. And it's still the same length movie, but now you just have, instead of 14 days, you have almost 30 days to shoot the movie. And that gives you a lot more time to focus. And that's what I try to tell people who are making a film for the first time. That they're saying, oh, we're going to shoot our movie in 10 days, or we're going to shoot our movie in 15 days. And I say, hey, man, listen, take your time. Really take your time. I guarantee you, the more time, if you take more time, you will not regret it. If you take less time, there's a possibility for regret. So, I think that was probably the biggest lesson, is just time. Take your time to develop it and really sit with it on set and sit with your actors and really explore scenes. And as cheesy as that sounds, it's so important. Just really take your time.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. And no one's ever really talked about, of the people that I've had on the show, no one's ever really mentioned taking your time when it comes to doing a film, whether it's a short or a feature. So now that was fantastic advice.
I shot a short film after I made the tent, because we shot this back in 2017. And so I shot the 10 in 14 days. And then with that short film, I took, it was 13 minutes long, and I took 4 days to shoot it. And people were like, man, it's a 13-minute movie. Why are you shooting in 4 days? And I was like, it's going to give us time to kind of sit down and really feel it out. And I cannot tell you how good it felt to really just have all that time. And it gave us also time to get to know one another. And, we weren't wasting too much time just gabbing. We were really just spending time getting comfortable with each other and letting the actors get to know each other. And it was really good. And I was so proud of some of these scenes in this short film, because I was like, man, we had so much time to just kind of feel it out and feel what it's like. So yeah, that's just another way of reiterating what I had said before, but yeah, it felt really good.
I'll have to remember that for my next short, taking my time. That's great advice. So what's next for you now that, as you said, the tent is complete, you worked on another short. Do you have any other things that you have in the works that you want to talk about?
I think right now, I also have a day job, and I'm, also blessed to do video production, for my day job too. So I do a lot of video for a nonprofit. And so, yeah, just really kind of doing my 9 to 5. And then, I'm actually in the process of writing my next feature film. And I won't say too much, cause it's still kind of finding itself, but it's definitely going to be kind of psychological in a similar fashion that the tent is. A lot more grounded than the tent, though. And, I'm definitely going to be working with Tim Kaiser, who was the lead and the executive producer of the tent. So, yeah, that's really it for right now.
Fantastic. Well, in closing, do you have any website or social media that you want to plug so the listeners can follow you?
Yeah, I'm not on social media personally. I kind of live vicariously through my wife's social media stuff. But we do have social media for the tent. It's Survive the Tent, and you just look that up on Facebook and you'll find us, or the Tent Movie. We're also on Instagram as the Tent Movie. And then we have a really cool website. It's www.survivethetent.com, and we put tons of Easter eggs on there And also, if you go to that website, you can check out, if you go under the tab that says watch the movie, you can see all the different places that's available to rent or to buy right now.
Fantastic. Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. This was an awesome chat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. I'm glad that shows like yours exist. Because I'll be honest with you, I learned a lot about filmmaking through shows like this. So I'm always happy to be a part of it.
No, absolutely. I appreciate the support. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at DDiamondPodcast. If you want to check out past episodes of the show, you can find it on Apple Podcast, Spotify, anywhere you get podcasts. Just search for The Derek Diamond Experience. And of course, thank you to the Unicorn Wranglers for providing the theme music for the podcast. You can check out all their music on Apple Music, Google Play, and Spotify. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you for tuning in to another awesome episode of The Derek Diamond Experience. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and we'll see you guys back here next Thursday.